Hey everyone out there in YouTube land, Dan here from GeekCast Radio, doing the first installment of a new series, my Longbox review series, where I go to my long boxes and pick out a book and to talk about it. And these are books that have impacted my fandom in some way, or it's a book that I've had for some time and maybe haven't read in forever, or maybe reading for the first time. As you know, as many comic book collectors know, those books that they'll read and pick up, put it in their long box and never see again. So I thought this will be a good way to force me to actually reread some of those books I've been collecting. And I thought, if I'm going to do this, it makes sense to go all the way back to where it all began for me, and that's with X-Men number 11 from the 1990 series. And I'm 99% believe that this is the first book that I've ever read, comic book that I've ever read, not actual book, which would be kind of cool if this was the first book that I ever read. But I, like many people from my generation, grew up on the X-Men cartoon series. Is really my first introduction to anything superhero. Before that, I was really much into G.I. Joe and kind of went into the X-Men after that. And what kind of got me into the X-Men first and foremost were the action figures, and then the cartoon, and then eventually the comics. And actually, I think this was my brother's comic because he was older than I was, and he picked this up, I believe, at the local. I think we didn't have a comic book store. I'm pretty sure he got it at the grocery store or something like that from their magazine racks. And I just remember looking at it and reading it. And when I look at this, the first thing I think of is just 90s. This to me is just reeks of every 90s in a good way and a bad way. Jim Lee. When I think of Jim Lee, this is what I think of. I know Jim Lee's been writing comics now forever, and he's still, a big person over at DC. But when I think Jim Lee, I will always just automatically associate him with this X-Men, this creation, this design. Still, to me, this is Jim Lee art. I actually think I like this Jim Lee art more than the more modern Jim Lee arts. Just there's something about it personality-wise, and mostly nostalgia. Like even just looking at the cover, for example, that Wolverine costume, it's just something about it just that works. Even looking at Cyclops, for example, like just the look on his face is just like that. It personifies everything about Cyclops, the attitude, and same thing with all the characters. I really miss this Beast, the look of Beast like this. I'm not a huge fan of like the Cat Beast and like whatever he is now. He's like kind of even more of a manimal or whatever his design now is just really weird. I really like that Beast. Again, it's more nostalgia than anything, I'll admit. So I went through and read this again, and it's odd. It's interesting. First and foremost, the first thing I noticed, one thing I love about reading old comics or the ads. I mean, I know people hate ads now when you're reading a new comic, but one of the best things about going to the old comics is looking at the ads. I'm like, oh, Universal Soldier, man, well, that was a movie that existed. And but what I found kind of interesting about this is that there was the humor in it wasn't something I remembered from X-Men at the time. And maybe as a kid reading it, I took it a lot more straightforward than was meant to be, because this is a continuation of Mojo World, and they're actually making some meta commentary here. Indicates that introducing Mojo to the sequel, like that just seems like something of like a personality trait of something of today, doing that, like commenting on the creation, like the almost the movie aspect of comics. Obviously, this was way before any of the movies came out, but knowing Mojo World was very much like built on television and things like that. And I was just reading this and wondering thinking at the time if I would pick up a lot of this, and I probably didn't. I knew who Mojo was because Mojo was in the cartoon, but I don't think I like some of the story bits and stuff like that. They are much different. Like some of the characters here aren't in the actual comic. Man, again, Jim Lee being Jim Lee. I miss this Jim Lee. I guess you couldn't really draw like this today because it wouldn't work as well. And also just how much story is in this compared to like today's world in comics. There's like this felt like this probably took as long to read as like 2 or 3 X-Men books that come out today. And in the sense of words, like something like this page right here, just lots of text that's kind of the common aspect of it, where you might get a page or so like this within comics today, but often it's not, as unless you're like reading a Tom King book. But even in that case, it's 9-panel grid with limited dialogue, and not like one way is better than the next, but it just makes it make you, yeah, you do feel like you're getting more of a story when you have this much dialogue, and but it can be a little bit tiresome. But man, this is what really jumped out at me too. That Wolverine right there, man, like that. That is Jim Lee, I think, at his best. just that, and like I was a huge Wolverine fan. He was like one of my favorite characters, as many growing up. Just the attitude, the look. I had a lot of like anytime I could find an Wolverine action figure, I would buy it. I had so many of them. The Weapon X one, the regular one, even his first one, which is really dinky and really odd. But I have to see if I could find some of those because I don't know if I still have any of them. But maybe back in my old house where my parents are living. But as a story wise, it's kind of nonsensical. It's crazy all over the place. I don't like. It's basically them fighting through Mojo World, having to fight themselves. Longshot makes an appearance, so that's always a plus, you know. And what's interesting is like this is written by Scott Lobdell, and I don't know why, but I always associated this X-Men series with Chris Claremont. Just off the top of my head, I think I always thought this was written by Chris Claremont, but of course that's not the case. But you know, it was a solid book. I wouldn't if this came out today. Again, this is clearly though like Jim Lee is what people bought this book for. The story itself was not all that fantastic, but that right there, right? You know, that X-Men, like it feels like a lot of these pages were made to be a poster. Like this was perfectly made to be a poster or maybe a trading card because those were really cool back in the day. But again, like interesting seeing that you see Wolverine smoking a cigar, what you can't do now in comics. And I kind of get why, but I think it did definitely add a lot of the attitude. Jubilee being Jubilee, again, very mall-centric with her Slurpee or whatever that is and popcorn because why not, you know? And then at the end, they had these Maverick files that added just like some story information about Maverick, who I think they thought was going to be a much bigger deal than he was. This too is very 90s with the gigantic gun. I remember as a kid, my brother was also a big Punisher fan, and we had a Punisher poster on the wall. It was a very similar image to that, where Punisher was getting like a bunch of bullets were coming his way, and he was going crazy. And then, of course, X-Men arcade game. Actually, just found out I went to a different comic book store that I usually go to, and saw that they actually had the X-Men arcade there. And I'm like, if I didn't have my son with me, I probably would have stopped to play a little bit, but I couldn't. And in the end, there was just little bits and pieces about that Maverick character is going through fighting Colossus and stuff like that, which wasn't anything all that important, but it was interesting reading through this. And then at the back page, back when you can actually order books through the mail. So I didn't have a lot of comics growing up as a kid. Like I said, we didn't really have a comic book store near me, and we kind of just got them here and there. And most of the ones that I have from that time period in the 90s were ones that my brother bought. A lot of X-Men, a lot of Image books that maybe I'll talk about too. It felt very cool going back to this and reading it. And I would be interested in like going through the X-Men series of this time, reading them one by one to see how well they hold up. And if they are as good as I remember them. This one was okay. Like it was a little much. Like I said, with as much writing and dialogue was there. By the end, I was a little tired of it. I was like, okay, I get the point. Especially because I'm not a huge fan of Mojo. Like I get where it's coming from, but I never like was one of the favorite X-Men villains for me. I just found that the concept worked okay, and then it got a little bit tiresome very soon. But I'd be curious to know for other people out there what their first comic was. Do you know what it was? Do you own it? Have you ever gone back to read it again? But again, this is my kind of quick thoughts on X-Men number 11 from the 90s series. And you know what's kind of funny too is when you go back to it and looking at who is credited on the page, the very first name that is credited is Jim Lee. So back when it was all about the artists and the writers were kind of an afterthought, or at least not the people selling the book like they are now. But anyways, I will be doing another one of these. My next book might be about the next series that kind of got me back in the comics in the early 2000s. So that might be fun revisiting that as well. For now, if you want more from this channel, you know how to handle YouTube, but I also have the Comic Concierge podcast that you can check out every Monday and Thursday. I do a weekly wrap-up episode, and then every Thursday, dive deep into a random comic book series with someone that I invite on and recommend a book to them based upon their interests in other fields. So recently, for example, spoke to JD Duran of In Session Film about Royal City. Jay Soderbergh, famously known as Pod Vader, recently talked to him about the Howard Stark series Kill Them All. That should be out soon as well. So you can find that all on a YouTube channel or at GeekCastRadio.com. But for now, remember, comics are for everyone. The key is finding the right one. Until next time, thanks for watching.